Earth has various domains. In the similar fashion, ecosystem also has various components. So what are those components means? So it is already well known to us. So what are the important components of the environment that we have studied?
The biotic and abiotic.
Good. So biotic as well as abiotic. So here also same type of components we will get. So here when we talk from the perspective of components of the ecosystem, we will have the biotic components and abiotic components. Okay. So abiotic components. So there we have studied in general way. So biotic components in environment means we have studied like plants, animals, microorganisms, insects, or other like human beings, etc. Like that we have studied. But in an ecosystem, how we can just simply differentiate between various biotic components means, so usually biotic components would be like this. They can be subdivided or categorized into various types, like we will have producers. In an ecosystem, we will have some type of organisms, living organisms called producers. So producers are nothing but those living organisms which have the ability to produce the energy by themselves. So production of the energy. So here we are discussing about production of energy. So that's why we are calling them as producers. So as they have the ability to produce energy by themselves, so that means they have the ability to nourish themselves. That means they are self-nourishing organisms. So self-nourishing, self means auto, nourishment means tropics. So tropism. So producers are also known as autotrophs. Autotrophs. So examples. Can you name any examples for autotrophs or the producers?
Plants, sir.
Good. Good. Green plants. Like in aquatic ecosystem, can you name any?
Green algae, sir.
Good. So phytoplanktons. So green plants in the terrestrial ecosystem and phytoplanktons in the aquatic ecosystem. They are basically considered as the producers. So the chief function is they will absorb the sunlight. They will absorb the sunlight, and from based upon they will pick the energy from convert the sunlight into energy. Within the presence of sunlight, they will produce the energy. So by photosynthesis, so it's well known to us. So that is one thing. Enough. Second type of biotic components that are there in the ecosystem would be known as the consumers. Consumers basically what they will do. Consumers basically either they will feed on these producers and they will derive the nourishment, or they will feed on other consumers to get their nourishment. So simple funda is that they are consuming the other animals and they are deriving the energy. So they are dependent upon other organisms to get their energy or to produce their energy. So other refers to hetero. Okay. So hetero, and they are deriving the nourishment. So heterotrophs. So we will call it likewise. So consumers are basically called as heterotrophs. So basically the heterotrophs can be of various types. So can you mention various types of heterotrophs or consumers that we can have?
Herbivorous, like deer, carnivorous, like lion.
Good, good. So we can further classify heterotrophs into different types. So one is nothing but the herbivores. Herbivores means what? Vorous means eating. So herbi means herbs. So those organisms which feeds on the green plants or which depends upon the direct producers. So autotrophs are nothing but herbivores. Okay. So they directly feed on the producers. So that is one thing. So as they are directly feeding on the producers, herbivores will also be known as primary consumers. Primary consumers. Okay. So examples, all the herbivores. You can give any example like rabbit, or think about grasshopper, which feeds on grass, rabbit which feeds on grass, or cow which feeds on grass, or zooplanktons which feeds on the phytoplanktons. So all of them are examples for herbivores. Okay, so that is one thing. Then next we will have the secondary consumers. That means those again living organisms which feeds upon other living organisms to derive their nourishment. So they are nothing but they are carnivores. Okay, so such animals are known as carnivorous animals. So here they are nothing but secondary consumers. Okay, so they will feed on other animals. And in the similar fashion, if we talk from the perspective of other consumers, so we will have those animals.
Omnivorous, sir.
Yes, good. Those animals which feeds on both plants as well as the animals. So they are nothing but omnivores. Omnivores. So in simple way, we can also call them as tertiary consumers. Tertiary consumers. Or but simply we can make it like omnivores. Omnivores would be the right word, but some omnivores may become tertiary consumers. Not all the omnivores becomes tertiary consumers. Okay, likewise. So this is how producers, consumers will be there. And after lapse of certain time, these producers and consumers, yes.
Sir, you gave a statement right now. Not all omnivores become tertiary consumers. Can you explain this, sir? In what sense?
See, omnivores. Omnivores means those animals which feeds on both plants and animals. And some omnivores can become the tertiary consumers. But not all the omnivores becomes tertiary consumers. That means when we go to levels of trophic levels, there you will understand the tertiary consumers. So there it won't be like all omnivores might be the tertiary consumers. Likewise. So that's what I was saying. Okay.
Okay, sir.
So that is one thing. So here, after a certain time, either the producers or consumers may die. So when they die, so in the ecosystem, if there is no mechanism for degradation of them, then they will pile up and the entire earth would be piled up by the living organisms or that thing. And so that further aspects cannot be sustained. So in order to degrade or in order to decompose these dead organic matter that is present or that gets piled up on the earth, we have other biotic component that would be present in the ecosystem. So that would be known as decomposers. So these decomposers, usually they will depend upon or they will derive their nourishment from the dead and decayed organic matter. So they will depend upon dead matter or decayed organic matter to get their nourishment. So dead and decayed matter, it is nothing but sapros. So saprotropes. So that's why they would be known as saprotropes. All the microorganisms, like let's say the bacteria or fungi. So all these things, they will get their nourishment like this through decomposition of various organic matter. So that's why they are known as decomposers. Okay. So usually they will depend upon the producers and they will also depend upon the consumers. So dead and decayed matter that. So that is how one thing will happen. So then apart from this, if you look at some of the important abiotic components, so it is very well understood to you that abiotic components can be can you say sunlight, then
Temperature, pressure,
good. So temperature, air, then water, then good. So soil. So air, water, soil, temperature, and sunlight, and all other things. So they are nothing but non-living things. They are nothing but abiotic components that are present in the ecosystem. So this is how basically we can differentiate between various components of the ecosystem. Okay. Now, if we see here with respect to the biotic components, we have saw that there is a particular pattern of feeding in the ecosystem. Okay, there is a particular pattern of feeding in the ecosystem. That means like omnivores they are feeding upon either carnivores or herbivores. And again, the herbivores, they are depending upon the producers. They are feeding on the producers. And the decomposers, they are feeding upon both consumers and producers likewise. So if you look in an ecosystem, there is a specific pattern and organization of the feeding. So thus, what we can bring here, if you see in an ecosystem, there is a specific organization and specific pattern of feeding. Specific pattern of feeding in the ecosystem. So such organization or pattern of feeding of one component, another component is basically nothing but the trophic structure. Is nothing but trophic structure of the ecosystem. Okay, so trophic structure. Trophic means nourishment. So trophic structure. And when we look from other perspective, here one organism is feeding upon another organism. So here we can have various levels through which energy passes from one component to other component. So those levels through which energy flows in an ecosystem, they are in simple fashion called as trophic levels. They are called as trophic levels. So trophic structure and trophic levels. Trophic structure means the organization and pattern of feeding in an ecosystem is nothing but trophic structure, and trophic levels means the levels in the ecosystem through which energy flows or energy passes from one component to another component. So they are nothing but trophic levels. So based on this, we have to understand some other component called food chains and food webs. Okay, so here we are using the word trophic levels. Okay, so if we talk from the perspective of the trophic levels, so usually the trophic levels would be made up of various levels. So they are nothing but levels. So usually in an ecosystem, at the bottom we will have producers. At the bottom we will have producers, and these producers will produce the energy. Okay, so that is the first level of first trophic level, and energy will pass from producers to next level, secondary level of secondary trophic level. So that is nothing but the consumers. Okay, so here particularly when we talk from the perspective of consumers, so it passes the energy to primary consumers. Okay, so primary consumers will occupy the second trophic level, and then next trophic level would be occupied by secondary consumers. Okay, and in the similar fashion, so we will have the next level, that is tertiary consumers. So basically this would be the level. These are nothing but various levels, trophic levels, to which energy would be passed in an ecosystem. Okay, so here when we talk from the perspective of this, so can you see that energy is flowing in this direction? Okay, so this is nothing but the direction of energy flow. This is the direction of energy flow. So energy will always flows from producers to the higher trophic levels. You remember that one. So that is one key thing that you have to remember here. Okay, so these are basically various trophic levels that would be there in an ecosystem. Okay, and now based upon these trophic levels, we have to understand another concepts called food chains and food webs. What are food chains and what are food web? So have you heard of food chains and food webs? So food chain and food web. So if we talk from the perspective of food chain, so what will happen in the food chain means, so usually in an ecosystem, there would be a particular sequence of organisms that feed on another organisms. So here, if we talk from the perspective of food chain, this sequence of organisms that feeds on another organism, is basically nothing but the food chain. So there would be a specific sequence. Okay. So here, when we talk from this food chain, usually this food chain. So let's say example for a food chain. Usually, remember, like there can be a grasshopper. Okay. So this grasshopper may feed on the grass. Okay. And sorry, like assume like there is a grass and the grass may be eaten up by a grasshopper, and a grasshopper can be eaten up by, let's say, anything like frog, and a frog may be eaten up by a snake, and a snake may be eaten up by a hawk. So in this fashion, if you see in an ecosystem, there would be a sequence of organism that feeds on another organism. Okay, if it is in terrestrial ecosystem, we can take examples likewise. And if it is an aquatic ecosystem, usually we can have some examples like, let's say, we will have the producers like phytoplanktons. Okay, so phytoplanktons. So phytoplanktons might be eaten up by zooplanktons. Okay, so zooplanktons. And these zooplanktons can be eaten up. They might be consumed by small fishes. And these small fishes can be consumed by either birds or they can be consumed by some things like the large or big fishes. Big fish. So here also we can see that there is a specific sequence in which an organism feeds on another organism. So such a sequence is nothing but food chain. Okay, so you remember likewise. Now here if we see what is the this is a food chain. So this food chain is getting started, or this food chain is getting initiated by producers. Can you see grass is a producer, green plant, and phytoplankton is a producer. So can you understand that a food chain may get start with the help of producers? Okay, and if you look in other instance, a food chain may also start with dead and decayed matter. Okay, so dead and decayed matter also can be one possibility. So for example, there are dead leaves. Dead leaves, that means organic matter, litter. So that might be present on the let's say the land. So this dead leaves would be consumed by decomposers. Okay, they might be consumed by the decomposers, and they like we can have these might be eaten by some other animals like wood louse. So wood louse or wood lice. So wood lice may consume this dead leaves, and this wood louse might be further eaten by some birds. Wood louse means insect which feeds on the dead leaves. So here can you see the food chain is being started by the dead decayed matter. So a food chain may either start with the green plants or like producers, or a food chain may start with the dead organic matter. So based on this, we can have two types of food chains. So what are they? So look carefully here that, so based on this, based on the beginner of the food chain. We can have two types of food chains. So here, if a food chain starts with the producer, it is known as the grazing food chain. It is known as the grazing food chain. Okay. If a food chain starts with the dead organic matter or dead and decayed matter, so you remember simply like if it starts with dead or dead organic matter, so then we will call that type of food chain as detritus food chain. Detritus food chain. Are you able to follow this? So based upon the initiator, based on the beginner. So here, again, if we talk from the perspective of grazing food chain, we have said that grazing food chain starts with producers. Producers means green plants or phytoplanktons likewise. And if this is happening, this grazing food chain, if it is happening on the terrestrial or land, on the land, so then we will call it as terrestrial grazing food chain. And if it is happening in the water, so then we will call it as aquatic grazing food chain. So a terrestrial grazing food chain will usually start with the green plants. It will start with the green plants. Okay. And an aquatic grazing food chain, it usually starts with the producers called phytoplanktons. Phytoplankton. So based on that, we can have two types of grazing food chains: terrestrial grazing food chain and aquatic grazing food chain. So is that clear? And if the food chain is being started, or it is being started by the decayed matter, it is known as detritus food chain. So here, the detritus food chain, usually it starts with the dead organic matter, and decomposers play vital role in this process. Decomposers play vital role in detritus food chain. Okay, so they are responsible for the digestion of, or the further processing of the dead and decayed matter likewise. So in this manner, we can just basically understand what is a food chain. Okay, so examples for food chain, you already know about them likewise. So if you look in an ecosystem, there will be several food chains that might be interrelated with one another. So in an ecosystem, we can have several food chains which might be interconnected. So at the next level, we will have something called food chain. So what do you mean by food web? So what do you mean by food web? The word web itself, it is indicating that there is a network. So a network of several interconnected, a network of several interconnected food chains is nothing but a food web. A food web. You can remember likewise. So web itself, it is a network. And what does this network consist of? Various units. So what are the units of food web? Various units of food web would be different food chains. And these different food chains would be interconnected. By whom? By various trophic levels. So likewise. So that network of several interconnected food chains is nothing but food web. So we can expect the flow of energy in either the food chains or in the food webs. Okay. So now here we are talking with respect to these trophic levels and the trophic structure. So we have understood what are the trophic levels, what is the trophic structure, and what happens in an ecosystem from the point of trophic structure. So here, when we try to graphically represent these trophic levels systematically, then we will get another things called ecological pyramids. Okay, so now, so what do you mean by an ecological pyramids? So ecological pyramids. So when we talk from the perspective of pyramid, so the name pyramid itself, it is representing that it's a type of graphical representation. So what we'll be doing here, we have various trophic levels. So here, that graphic or graphical representation of uh, relationship between various trophic levels. Various trophic levels refers to an ecological pyramid. Okay, so usually we have producers, we have consumers, and in consumers also we have different types of consumers. So when we systematically try to construct them in the form of structures, so then they are nothing but the ecological pyramids. So usually the base of an ecological pyramid is usually composed of producers. Okay, so at the base we will have the producers, and then above to this we will have the herbivores that are there. That is nothing but the primary. They are nothing but the primary consumers. And then at the next level, we will have secondary consumers. And at the next level, we will have the tertiary consumers. So we have understood these are nothing but various trophic levels. And this is how they would be made up of. And when we try to construct them in a graphic manner, usually the number of producers may be more, and generally they may form the base. So we will construct them in the form of a pyramid. So that pyramid consists of like this. So producers, primary consumers, secondary consumers, and tertiary consumers. So base is made up of the producers and apex is made up of the tertiary consumers likewise. So you have to remember that. So based on the parameter which we are taking, so we can have basically 3 types of ecological pyramids. So what are the 3 important types of ecological pyramids that we can have? 3 types of pyramids, ecological pyramids. What are the types of ecological pyramids? Anyone?
So pyramid of biomass, pyramid of number,
Good.
and
Very good.
pyramid of energy. So
Yes, good.
Number
So
of population.
good. So when we talk from the perspective of different types of ecological pyramids, if we are considering number as the parameter, then we will have one thing called pyramid of number. Pyramid of numbers. And if we take the amount of biomass that is being produced in an ecosystem, then we will call that kind of pyramid as pyramid of biomass. Okay, and then we can also graphically represent various levels of ecosystem based upon the energy produced at each successive trophic level. So if the energy is the parameter, then we will have another type of pyramid called pyramid of energy. So there are 3 important types of ecological pyramids. So first one is nothing but the pyramid of numbers, and second one is nothing but pyramid of biomass, and third one is nothing but the pyramid of energy. Okay, so here when we talk from the perspective of these, if we graphically represent various number of organisms at each trophic level, for example, how many producers are there, how many primary consumers are there, how many secondary consumers are there, how many tertiary consumers are there. So if we represent by number, then that would be known as the pyramid of numbers. So usually in general way to talk about the pyramid of numbers. So from your knowledge, from your recollection, can you try to answer to the question that can a pyramid of number be upright? Can it be an upright? What is upright position means? This, like this.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes. So a pyramid of number can be upright. Okay. It's not reading this. So these were the basic things like trophic levels. So primary producers, primary consumers, secondary consumers, or tertiary consumers that we were having. So then you see examples for food chains can be like this. So we have already understood grass. So then grasshopper and then birds. Likewise, there would be a specific sequence of organisms which feeds on another organism. So that is food chains. So grazing food chain and detritus food chain. If it is getting started with the producer, then that would be known as a grazing food chain. So see several examples you can see, like it may start with grass, grasshopper, mouse, snake, hawk. So that can be one thing. Or like plant, caterpillar, then lizard, then snake. So this can be another food chain. Or like phytoplanktons, zooplanktons, fishes, etc. Likewise. Or the grasses, rabbit, and that would be eaten up by fox. So this can be another example for grazing food chain. Likewise, we can have various things. And like then we can have detritus food chain, which starts with a dead organic matter. Can you see like litter or leaves? So they can be eaten up by woodlouse, and this can be eaten up by a bird. So likewise. So this can be an example for the detritus food chain. And then if you see in the ecosystem, there can be several interrelated food chains. So that several interrelated food chains in an ecosystem, they are nothing but a food web. So if you see, for example, grasshopper is connected with this line, and grasshopper is connected with this line. So this food chain, this food chain. So they are interconnected. Okay, so likewise. So that is food web.